Okay, good evening. Tonight is the 21st of May, 2016, here in Vancouver. This is the BC chapter of the LaRouche movement. And tonight, I have good news for people. It has become evident that there is leadership in the world, and that leadership does have an idea of where the world needs to go. It's not just us crying out in the wilderness. Okay? And that leadership is currently represented by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And often you wonder if leaders really know what they're doing. You wonder if they're just reacting to events. You wonder if they're just trying to survive for another day before someone else removes them, or some scandal erupts, or whatever. But what we're seeing in Putin is not any of that. What we're seeing in Putin is an actual comprehension of what has to occur and what can occur, and that it's not something that will occur on its own, but rather it is something you have to create. There's creativity involved. It's something you have to organize. You have to organize nations. You have to organize elites in nations. You have to organize nations' elites to organize other nations' elites around a comprehensive concept of what needs to occur for there to be viability for human existence, but not any kind of human existence, but human existence that is worth existing in. So that is what we're seeing beginning to manifest itself more and more by what Putin is doing. He is not reacting to events. He's creating the process that creates events. And we haven't seen anything like this in the recent period. And the only person I know who has functioned this way is Lyndon LaRouche. But since he went to prison, and since he's been under assault from the FBI, our movement's been under assault from the FBI, we have been operating with the idea that our ideas would take hold out of the necessity of the situation, provided there were some leaders in the world who could understand and begin to operate in that way. And we're seeing that with Putin, and we're seeing that with the Chinese leadership. But the Chinese leadership currently which is working with Putin, has a relationship with Putin that is very important. And Putin is the principal leader. Not to say that Xi Jinping is not a leader, but that Putin is the one initiating the process that is global in nature. Now, what happened in Palmyra with the concert, which occurred a few weeks ago, where Bach's Chaconne was played, is very important, because it's a signal to the world, and especially to the European nations, that Russia's actions have not an imperial intention, but have an intention of defending civilization against the barbarism of ISIS, Al-Qaeda. But it's not ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's the Saudis, it's the British Empire, it's the United States' current policy that we're talking about. And this is very important, because you're establishing a principle of civilization, a principle of a conception of humanity, as opposed to the absolute barbarism of the beheading of the curator and so forth and so on. Now, so now I'm going to digress for some period of time to give you an idea, which you probably already have, but it'll give you a better idea of the significance of what Putin is doing in the context of what's emerged since 2014, which is the BRICS process, the Chinese One Belt, One Road, New Silk Road process, the Eurasian customs, the Eurasian Union process, and other processes which are emerging alongside those processes, which are going on. But it's the magnitude of this is not fully apparent unless you take a historical perspective. And the starting point of this is 1944, where the Wall Street British establishment and their agency, the FBI, was successful in preventing Henry Wallace from becoming the vice presidential candidate in 1944. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had developed a strategy for the world, which is very similar at that time, which is very similar to the strategy to the perspective that Putin has now. It's really not that much different between what Roosevelt projected for the post-war period and what Putin is projecting now. Roosevelt was not projecting an American empire. He was going to work with Stalin, and Stalin and Roosevelt were going to work together. Why? Because they were not for having colonialism. And Stalin wanted to develop Russia, the Soviet Union. And you wouldn't have had the Cold War, and you would have had the rapid industrial development of all of the world, because what the United States did in World War II was establish an industrial machine for the war that would have expanded and done an incredible job of developing the world. We're similar to the situation that China is trying to enter into now. But that industrial machine was to a large degree dismantled by the British and Truman. And instead we had a Cold War. And that's the starting point for the emergence of what became known in its day as the Atlanticist Empire, the Atlantic Empire, the Atlantic Empire. I call it the Atlantic Empire because that's what they call it. They call it the Atlantic Empire. It was called the Atlantic Alliance. And it included NATO, and they brought in Japan. Well, Japan was a conquered nation. And so you had Western Europe, you had Canada and the United States, and you had Japan. And those were the developed countries. And the rest of the world was either communist, bloc, or underdeveloped. And their policy was not to allow development in the underdeveloped countries, but to establish the hegemony of this transatlantic system. They call themselves Atlanticists. That's what they call themselves. And the Council on Foreign Relations and the British Royal Institute for Strategic Affairs and so forth and so on. Now, Bertrand Russell's plan, announced in 1946, was, 2 years later, after the 44 elections, 2 years later, was to preemptively nuke the Soviet Union, which had defeated the Nazis, pretty much. To preemptively nuke them if they did not submit to a world order. So that didn't happen. And when the Soviet Union became an equal power nuclear, and they transformed the area that they took over from Europe into the Soviet bloc nations, what you had was a world in which NATO was protecting Europe from the Soviet bloc. And you had a Cold War. And the Cold War extended into the underdeveloped sector as well, with guerrilla wars and all kinds of wars, and all mixed in with nationalism in the developing nations, got all mixed into the Marxism and all of this stuff. And this was going on. And NATO existed to defend the Atlantic Alliance, to defend the European countries. And on the basis of that defense, the British and the US had hegemony over Europe and the world outside of the communist sector, with some resistance from the Third World. And were seeking total hegemony, but this was the world. And so the way everything was explained was, we have this defense against the communist system, which would otherwise take over the world if we didn't have this defense, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea of the communist system and its operations were the reason for NATO to exist, were the reason for this military power, and for the reason for this hegemony of increasing hegemony of Wall Street and the City of London, and the transformation. So this was the military umbrella under which this whole transformation was taking place, the dismantling of what Roosevelt intended in the post-war system, and the creation, increasingly, of an integrated financial structure based on the offshore banking structures. So, in all efforts to bring the Cold War to an end, so there could be collaboration between the Soviet Union and the West, which Kennedy wanted to do, and even some of the other presidents were thinking of doing, did not materialize. And what kept this thing in place was the threat of nuclear war. It was, constant threat of nuclear war kept this structure in place. So when the Soviet system finally collapsed, it created two possibilities. One, the possibility of establishing a one-world system as proposed by Bertrand Russell of world government under the Atlanticist power, which we centered around the British and the US. But it also created another possibility. The possibility that nations no longer threatened by the dynamic of the Cold War could assert their own interests, which were not the same. Their own interests for their own people. And this is especially the case with Germany, which when the communist system collapsed, Germany was looking at the reunification of Germany. The natural interest of Germany would be to massively expand and develop, with its advanced industrial capability, the East Bloc countries, the former East Bloc countries, and so forth. Now, but Germany was imposed, the European Union was imposed as a straitjacket, and Germany was brutally forced to accept the straitjacket of the European system, of the European Union, as a price for reunification. And the European Union was established to contain the aspirations of economic development of the European nations, to contain them. But there still lacked the military rationale for submitting to the Atlanticist empire. And that emerged around the time that it became obvious that they weren't going to conquer Russia. And that came with 9/11. What 9/11 was the beginning of a new era of regional defense based on defending your country, defending your people against this terrorism, against this terrorist threat. And this was the basis on which NATO was expanded, and the U.S. went into Iraq and Afghanistan, places which had nothing to do with this per se, and this whole process of a projection of military power to contain these nations, to keep them in the system, as that system was experiencing this economic stresses and the desires, the natural instincts of the people of those countries for things that were in their interests, not in the interests of Wall Street or the City of London or whatever. So now you have the incoming Bush administration and 9/11, and that became the structure of control. And the more this terrorism grew and was promoted and was propagated through a number of different ways, the more the threat existed, the more control this was supposed to impose. Now, so the emergence of terror emerged as the instrument of rule in the following ways. Okay, one, we protect you from terror. Your military and whatever, you have to be integrated and coordinate with us to protect you from terror. You have to coordinate your surveillance and intelligence capabilities with us to protect you from terror. And if you don't maintain the proper submission, we're not going to protect you anymore from the terror. Okay? That's pretty straightforward. Now, Russia is an imperial aggressor. And you notice they took over the Crimea. You notice they're trying to reestablish themselves with the Eurasian Union. They're trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. We can't let that happen. We gotta bring them in line. We gotta have sanctions on them. Right? So you have sanctions. You have the Ukraine situation, you have sanctions. Well, why do these countries adopt sanctions? Do they really want to adopt sanctions against Russia? Russia provides them with the gas. Do they really want to adopt sanctions? No. But why are they imposing? Why do they? Because they're being told, you're going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So that's what they did. And either we will collapse you politically through blackmail, through our surveillance capabilities or scandals, or we will not stop terrorist incidents that we're running, essentially, from happening to you. Do you understand? Do you understand? Yes, you do understand, don't you? So that's kind of the context that you have to understand with the significance of the ongoing developments in the United States around the issue of the 28 pages. The 28 pages is not just about the Saudis. It's about the British. It's about the FBI. It's about the suppression of evidence. It's about the ugly truth about this whole thing. And when you get that out, whether they actually release the 28 pages fully or not, it's the whole process of forcing the issue. You are causing a complete destruction of the structure of raison d'etre, of the edifice of control of the whole system. The Saudis are not independent from the British. They are one and the same in this situation. And what you're doing is you're destroying the credibility of the system. So the Saudis put out a 101-page recently white paper on their glorious campaign against the people that they're financing. And they got one to every congressman. That's not going to work. The stuff is getting out. The truth is getting out. And that whole process is not happening by itself. It's happening in the context of what Putin is doing, what the Chinese are doing. Now, Putin's actions in Syria are precisely profound in this respect. It's not that there was a lot of military use. It's not any of that. It's like Russia supported the existing structures, strengthened. They didn't take over, they strengthened. Now, they've announced, guess what? In a week from now, the head of the Russian military, what's his name? The Tubian, whatever, what's his name? Huh? Shoigu announced that he wants the United States now to collaborate and coordinate with Russia because we're now going to go into a massive air bombing campaign of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and ISIS, and we want all the groups that are not part of that to get out of the way. All right, and U.S., you want to help, right? You want to help us do that, right? I mean, you are fighting terrorism, aren't you? Okay, you know. So what Russia's demonstrated in Syria is like, we're not there to be your big brother. We're there to help you survive so you can be part of the whole process. The BRICS, the infrastructure projects, the economic development, the potential we have for a future for humanity. And therefore, we will work with you. We are not there to overthrow you. We are not there to bring you down. Oh, you're a little bit corrupt? Okay, well, we'll work with you anyhow. You know, we're not here to judge you in the court of human rights, British Human Rights Court. We're not here to judge you. Right. Okay, now imagine had ISIS taken over Syria. What would the world be like now? This thing would have been unleashed, this Caliph business. And it would have spread. It would be spreading into Central Asia right now. It would be spreading into bombings in India and Pakistan and all throughout Africa, although it's already happening. It would have Lebanon. The whole place would have been blown up. And Europe would have been sunk. There would be no hope. It would be all over. Because this is an armed, an auxiliary arm of global conquest. When the Islamic thing says we're going to have global conquest, they're not the ones that are going to conquer. They're being used to conquer. They're not going to, you know, it's like Hitler saying I'm going to conquer the world, but that's not what the British intended. They intended for Hitler to destroy the Soviet Union, and then they would take over. So you have waves of terror and refugees. Would have accelerated. There would be no hope. But no, it didn't happen that way. And if you understand what I'm saying, you begin to fathom the horror and evil of who Obama is as a wholly owned British Saudi property. You begin to understand who Obama really is. And then you begin to understand that there's now a fight in the U.S. Congress around the Justice Against State-Sponsored Terrorist bill, which passed the U.S. Senate by a unanimous vote. Of course, nobody's going to openly go against it. And now there's a big fight coming in the House within a week or two. And the Obama administration has already announced they're going to veto it. And they're counterattacking. Now, this is very important because it's a fight. Now, the question I have to ask is, do all these liberals, peace activists, Obama supporters, New Agers know this about Obama? That he is unleashing the most horrific, he's involved in unleashing the most horrific, murderous barbarism that the world has probably seen. Or at least, you know, of that nature. Do they understand that? I sometimes think they do. And I sometimes think they don't want to. But what they say is, don't blame Obama. He's only doing what the system tells him. Okay. Well, you mean the system that you live under? The system is telling you you live under and you can't do anything about it. You're powerless. You're just the system. And the President of the United States really doesn't want to go along with the system, but he's kind of powerless too. Now guess where that formulation is coming from? The Obama administration is putting that out. That's the line. In other words, there's nothing you can do. Obama's a good person. He's doing his best within a system that controls him. He doesn't really want to do it. But really, it's really what the system is. And there's nothing he can do, therefore there's nothing you can do. Therefore, it's kind of sad, but that's the way it is. You know. So, these people, what's going on with them? What's happening? Where's their anger? Where's their rage? Well, what's going on is they're saying to themselves, it's not my responsibility. Or they're saying, I choose not to want to have to think about it. I can make my own reality, you know? You know, those kind of people that say, I can make my own reality, you know, I choose to, it's my choice. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to have bad thoughts. I can have good thoughts. And if we all have good thoughts, you know, the world would be much better, wouldn't it? You all know, you all been there with that, okay? You all know what that is, okay? And you try to explain it to them. No, you're just bringing negativity into the situation. You're just being negative. Why don't you be positive? Why don't you be positive? You know, if everybody was positive, we wouldn't have these problems. And, you know, so anyhow, so let's look at these candidates from this standpoint. Does Bernie Sanders, who praises Obama but hates Obama, knows that Obama wants to unleash the dark ages on the human race? He does. And what does Bernie say? It doesn't matter who is president. The system is rigged. Well, who controls it, Bernie? I'm running for president. But I'm really not running to be president because the president can't do anything because it is rigged. So if I become president, I won't be able to do anything. But I'm running to get the people to go against the system. That's not very potent. And so all the people come out for Bernie Sanders, or the segment of the population come out, and they don't have a clue. They're not an organization. They're not structured. They don't have cadres. They're not in any kind of political formation that's going to do anything. They're like the rising tide that goes out. You know, it comes in and goes out. They're just responding. They're not being, you know. So anyhow, so now does Hillary understand that Obama is a murderous, dark age creature? Yeah. She's with him now. She's part of it. She wants to be the next Obama. She's envious.
The female version. The female version of Obama.
Yes, she's envious. She's got Obama envy. Now, we have a political class which is complicit with Obama, and an intellectual liberal class who believes they can create their own reality and feel good about themselves. So this is the problem in the U.S. Yet nonetheless, the 28 pages is breaking out. And the 28 pages is breaking out because of what's going on in the rest of the world. It's a response of attacking the system within the U.S., but it's also being definitely supported from outside the United States. So, so now let's go into what's going on here. in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks. Now this is spectacular. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met with Putin in a major summit on May 6th. And what came out of the summit was this project and that project and this project and a pathway to resolving the territorial issue of the islands. Well, I forgot the name, Kuril Islands.
Kuril Islands, yeah.
Yeah. And what happened? China. I mean, what happened? Japan is making deals with Russia on a big scale. What happened to the sanctions on Russia? Well, the Japanese are not going with the sanctions. And by the way, Obama told Shinzo Abe personally that he shouldn't go to this meeting, this summit, and he did. And not only that, this is huge. What is Putin doing? They're recruiting the Japanese into the system. They've been recruiting them all along. And there's a crack. And the Japanese are starting to say, okay, well, this other thing doesn't make any sense. Let's go where it makes sense. What is the future of Japan in this terrorism society? What's the future of Japan in a dead financial system? What's the future of Japan? There is no future for Japan. So now they're moving. So now they're seeing a process. They're seeing a process, and the Japanese are going to clean house, man. They're going to do great in this system. They got a lot of stuff that they could be producing for it, and they got a lot of stuff they can get out of it, and they're looking at a much better deal than you can imagine. So how are they going to stop the Japanese from doing that? I don't know. But a new system is coming to being. It's being organized, and then we just finished an Asian summit in Sochi. Okay, this is Southeast Asia, meeting with Russia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, the Philippines. Guess what? Big deals between Russia, Indonesia, between Russia and these other countries. Big economic deals, discussions. Well, I thought Russia was the enemy. Russia was the enemy. Now all of a sudden, all of Southeast Asia is talking about deals with Russia, economic deals. And of course, China's in the middle of it. What's happening? Where is the Atlantic Empire? Where is the power of the Atlantic Empire right now? It's disappearing. And then the Philippines. Obama's #1 toady, Noynoy Aquino. Well, he's a new president's coming in June or July. His name is what's his name? His name is Duarte. Well, his first act as a president-elect, or he hasn't been confirmed, but he is going to be the president, is to meet with the Chinese. So what does this mean? This means a new system is coming into being, and then you add to that all kinds of other developments that are going on with respect to Iran, building a port right near the border with a huge port right near the border with Pakistan, which will be a key port in the Indian Ocean, be part of this whole process. And then you go to Europe. There's a lot of nations and political parties that are saying, why the sanctions have to be renewed in July. The sanctions from Europe on Russia run out in July, and there's a lot of pressure now building to say, well, we're not going to continue the sanctions. It's not working for us. It's hurting us. And so right now, there's no unanimity on reimposing the sanctions or reestablishing the sanctions. And so how is Obama going to come in with the British and the whoever else and say to the Europeans, dictate to the you're going to increase the sanctions on Russia? How are they going to do that? Especially after what Russia did in Syria. And what is Russia doing? They're talking to all the Europeans. And the foreign minister of Germany, Steinmeier, has come out in favor of the Eurasian land bridge. Is now talking about Vladivostok to Vancouver. Is now talking about the benefit from the Chinese railway that connects up China with Germany. And he's talking that way. Why is he talking that way? Well, because things are changing. And the thing is cracking open. And Italy, you have similar developments. And you have similar developments in Austria and Switzerland, and places like that. However, in Poland, you have the opposite development, but that's Polish. That's a Polish problem. And so what's happening is this whole process is going on around this concept of civilization, but not a concept of empire. But the United States, under Obama, is sending troops to Yemen, is sending troops to Libya. Okay, so they're not, the British and the Obama crowd are not giving up. They're going in that direction. So now we come to the military equation. So, let me know if you've already heard this, but what the United States has as a military doctrine is called prompt global strike. Now, what is prompt global strike? It's the original Bertrand Russell policy of preemptive knocking out of Russia and China. Well, now it would be Russia and China, but it would have been originally the Soviet Union. It's the same policy. What's preemptive? We must develop the means to be able to preemptively defeat, eliminate a recalcitrant Russia, which is not behaving, which is challenging our hegemony because they want to exist, and China along with them. So that's the U.S. policy. It's public. Prompt global strike. So they've been putting the ABM systems in Romania, and they're putting them in Poland, I think, also, and they're doing all of these things and they're putting all this money into new armament for what? For deterrence? No. Preemptive strike. So they have this new fighter jet they have. It's just an example. It's the F-35. I don't know if I talked to anybody about this. No. Okay, the F-35. It's a stealth fighter. Stealth meaning that it's stealth with respect to radar. But if you're in a fighting position with other fighters, you can see it. It's not stealth, but that's not what it's for. It's not for fighting other fighters. It's a fighter that can go up to Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound, not be detected, go up 60,000 feet, and drop what are called gravity bombs. Now, but these gravity bombs are this very advanced technology is being put into these gravity bombs so that they can be guided. I don't know how you guide a rock to a destination without
put fins on its tail.
But they must have fins on them.
They have fins on them. They're controlled, computer controlled.
Computer control. They're guided rocks. They cannot be detected easily because there's no heat signature. There's no heat signature. And you don't know that they've been dropped. You don't know if it's a bird taking a dump or if,
That's so dumb.
you know what it is. You don't know if it's a, you know, if it's an eagle, two eagles doing it as they're coming down. You have no idea. You have no idea what it is. So, so now this is scary. You don't know. It hits you. You don't even know it's up there. You don't even know it's coming down. How are you going to defend against it? That's insane to do that. You wouldn't do that unless you were preparing to go for a first strike. This is what the Russians are dealing with. So to counter this, what the Russians have done is they have another fight. They have a fighter that they've created, and you can correct me on this, that is designed to intercept these fighters before they get up there. And they have very special capabilities, not radar capabilities as such, per se, but very special visual and infrared capabilities. And they're going to be tracking everywhere, all these fighters and where they are. And when they go up into they're not going to be able to sense them necessarily by radar, but they're going to have Russian fighters there. That's their plan. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of buzzing around. And this bomber that approached Russian airspace had his transponder turned off. That's the one they made a big stink about. But the point is that these are the kind of things that are going on, and it can be supposed that should the Obama crowd, which is now fully Obama, they're fully British, the defense secretary and the Obama, that if they sense that they have an advantage and they can go with it, they will do it. They will launch a preemptive nuclear war. But the Russians, knowing that, might launch a preemptive strike before they launch the strike. That's how crazy the situation is. But it's this kind of marginal developments in technology that the Russians and the Chinese are doing, which is the key to keeping a nuclear first strike or a retaliatory preemptive strike before the anticipated first strike occurs from occurring. Because if they don't see that they have the potential of doing that, then it's less likely they can get it, they will do it. So that's part of the equation in this situation. So you have the nuclear warfare equation, and then you have these other developments. But the key is going to be the situation, not just in the U.S., but it's a global situation. It's not just a U.S. situation, it's a global situation. The 28 pages is definite response from within the United States to the potential of defeating this thing internationally. So it's an international process. And I know from first-hand experience that there's a lot of organizing going on by the Russians. They're organizing American institutions, American interests, American elements. I know the Chinese are doing it from an economic standpoint. There's a lot of organizing going on. And our job is to make sure that we play the role of being a point of reference. We don't have the mass numbers, not anywhere near like we used to have, but we play the point of reference. That we don't make mistakes. We play the point of reference for this. So now, the situation with the 28 pages is that Senator Bob Graham is not backing off. There's all kinds of coverage. He's now going after the FBI for aggressive, I forgot the term he used, but it's not covering up. It's aggressive misdirection.
Deception.
Aggressive deception. And we've had a rally in front of the FBI headquarters, and we're going to start be much more aggressive against the federal FBI. because you need to create an environment where people are not so scared. And so we are coming into a world that has great potential. And on the scientific side, you have a giant scientific orientation emerging in the Chinese space program. The issue of the far side of the moon is very important because it's from observations from the far side of the moon that you're going to begin to get some idea of what the galaxy is. You know, we don't really know what we're dealing with, and because of the low frequency electromagnetic is not being picked up by, and therefore we don't have an image of what comes of a low frequency, of the very low frequencies. And we will get that from the far side of the moon. And the thing about the Chinese is that they're bringing the space program to the grade schools. They're bringing this vision, the China vision of China, just like Kennedy. And it's big. And it's infecting 1 billion, 500 million, 250 million children, maybe hundreds of millions of children, and this is going to be there for the next 50 years. This is a directionality that isn't going to go away, and I believe the Indian government is doing the same thing. I believe the Modi government is doing the same thing with their space program.
And for way less money than NASA or the Americans have ever done any of their projects either.
Right.
If you look at the Indian capability of what they succeeded in doing by going to the moon, you know, it was done on a tenth of the budget.
Right.
Actually,
The same type of thing.
the Indian mission to Mars cost less than the budget for the movie Mission to Mars.
No, Gravity. Gravity.
Gravity.
It was the movie Gravity.
No, I looked it up.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Mission to Mars. Really?
So we're coming into a world that has potential. And we're much further along in it than I thought we were. But it's because individuals like Putin have a conception of this process, that you have to organize people. You have to organize people. You have to organize nations. You can't use terror. You can't use terror to control the world. You have to organize nations around a common good. And so the actual title of the it's very interesting. The actual title of the the actual title of the Sochi conference, or the Asian conference, was the Strategic Perspective for the Common Good. You know, the strategic perspective for the common good. In other words, it's the common good. That was the subject, not, you know, the World Trade Organization or anything like that. So all these institutions, the World Trade Organization, all of this is in deep trouble. And I haven't even talked about the continuing saga of the financial system. But that is being overshadowed by the reality of a new system coming in. And so I'm gonna stop there and let's have it out.
What's the white paper that the Arabs?
Huh?
What's the white paper you referred to?
That was a Saudi white paper on what a wonderful job they're doing combating terrorism.
That's when the budget is.
It's a great one.
Okay. Good evening. Tonight is the 21st of May, 2016, here in Vancouver. This is the BC chapter of the LaRouche movement. And tonight, I have good news for people. it has become evident that there is leadership in the world, and that leadership does have an idea of where the world needs to go. It's not just us crying out in the wilderness. Okay? And that leadership is currently represented by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And often you wonder if leaders really know what they're doing. You wonder if they're just reacting to events. You wonder if they're just trying to survive for another day before someone else removes them, or some scandal erupts, or whatever. But what we're seeing in Putin is not any of that. What we're seeing in Putin is an actual comprehension of what has to occur and what can occur, and that it's not something that will occur on its own, but rather it is something you have to create. There's creativity involved. It's something you have to organize. You have to organize nations. You have to organize elites in nations. You have to organize nations' elites to organize other nations' elites around a comprehensive concept of what needs to occur for there to be viability for human existence, but not any kind of human existence, but human existence that is worth existing in. So that is what we're seeing beginning to manifest itself more and more by what Putin is doing. He is not reacting to events. He's creating the process that creates events. And we haven't seen anything like this in the recent period. And the only person I know who has functioned this way is Lyndon LaRouche. But since he went to prison, and since he's been under assault from the FBI, our movement's been under assault from the FBI, we have been operating with the idea that our ideas would take hold out of the necessity of the situation, provided there were some leaders in the world who could understand and begin to operate in that way. And we're seeing that with Putin, and we're seeing that with the Chinese leadership. But the Chinese leadership currently which is working with Putin, has a relationship with Putin that is very important. And Putin is the principal leader. Not to say that Xi Jinping is not a leader, but that Putin is the one initiating the process that is global in nature. Now, what happened in Palmyra with the concert, which occurred a few weeks ago, where Bach's Chaconne was played, is very important, because it's a signal to the world, and especially to the European nations, that Russia's actions have not an imperial intention, but have an intention of defending civilization against the barbarism of ISIS, Al-Qaeda. But it's not ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's the Saudis, it's the British Empire, it's the United States' current policy that we're talking about. And this is very important, because you're established in preventing Henry Wallace from becoming the vice presidential candidate in 1944. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had developed a strategy for the world, which is very similar at that time, which is very similar to the strategy to the perspective that Putin has now. It's really not that much different between what Roosevelt projected for the post-war period and what Putin is projecting now. Roosevelt was not projecting an American empire. he was going to work with Stalin. And Stalin and Roosevelt were going to work together. Why? Because they were not for having colonialism. And Stalin wanted to develop Russia, the Soviet Union. And you wouldn't have had the Cold War. And you would have had the rapid industrial development of all of the world, because what the United States did in World War II was establish an industrial machine for the war that would have expanded and done an incredible job of developing the world. We're similar to the situation that China is trying to enter into now. But that industrial machine was to a large degree dismantled by the British and Truman. And instead we had a Cold War. And that's the starting point for the emergence of what became known as a principle of civilization, a principle of a conception of humanity, as opposed to the absolute barbarism of the beheading of the curator and so forth and so on. Now, so now I'm going to digress for some period of time to give you an idea, which you probably already have, but it'll give you a better idea of the significance of what Putin is doing in the context of what's emerged since 2014, which is the BRICS process, the Chinese One Belt, One Road, New Silk Road process, the Eurasian customs, the Eurasian Union process, and other processes which are emerging alongside those processes, which are going on. But it's the magnitude of this is not fully apparent unless you take a historical perspective. And the starting point of this is 1944, where the Wall Street British establishment and their agency, the FBI, was successful